Was Teo Fabi, as he had to maneuver out and around none other than Mike Groff. There's Groff's car. He was involved in that incident earlier on, and he's back out on the course. But now they go to a full course yellow, and that is to recover the car of Raul Boesel. They thought that was too precarious a position, and so we're now full course yellow. The field will line up behind the PPG pace car and Al Unser Jr., and reform, and we'll go racing again with 8 laps complete here of the 77 in Detroit. We're back at the ITT Automotive Detroit Grand Prix, still under a full course yellow. And here they've been concerned about tire pressures, checking pressures there, but there's another pressure. Yeah, that's right. Detroit, one of the cities for the World Cup. And Saturday, ABC Sports coverage of World Cup 94 begins. The USA takes on Switzerland live beginning at 11:30 in the morning Eastern, 8:30 Pacific. Then the world's best golfers take aim at our national title, the U.S. Open Golf Championship. Live weekend coverage begins Saturday at 1:30 Eastern, 10:30 Central, right here on ABC Sports. So there's the field, lined up with Al Unser Jr. at the head, followed by Paul Tracy, Nigel Mansell, and Emerson Fittipaldi. Now, during the yellow, we've had a second car roll to a stop, and that was Mike Groff. We'll get an update on that in a moment. The Goodyear blimp Spirit of Akron is floating overhead, providing aerial views of the Detroit Grand Prix. The Goodyear blimp has been flying over major events for 61 years, and there she is. So gentle in the sky overhead. There is Mike Groff now climbing out of that car after he drove it to a stop there. Jack Arute, do you have any idea what the problem is here?
Paul, believe it or not, in that first altercation, he damaged some suspension pieces, and now there's some suspect that maybe in that altercation he might have damaged his brakes as well, because he reported in that he ran out of brakes. And his brakes are inoperative, so he cannot continue, especially on a road course here. One other item to remember, Paul, is the Honda engine aboard Mike Groff's car is not the new updated version of the Honda engine that Bobby Rahal is driving. He's using the older type engine in competition. Didn't last too long.
Jack, in the slow-mo replay of the accident itself, there were a lot of parts bouncing around in the course, but those apparently were not Mike Groff's. Were they Lyondike's?
Well, that's what happened, is everybody did a little bumper tag out there, and one of the things that we saw, Paul, as you know, a lot of the designers now have taken these front wing sections, and they're able to replace them in approximately 25 to 30 seconds during a pit stop. All of that carbon fiber you saw flying came from Arie Luyendyk's car. He came in minus both front wings.
Jack, the interesting thing, of course, is that engine of Mike Groff's was the Honda that was supposed to be bulletproof. It's the one in Rahal's car that has the question marks surrounding it. He blew one up here on Friday. He blew one up in testing earlier in the week. Let's have a look at that engine.
That situation earlier. Now watch all of the parts. Groff's going to come flying through. Yeah, that's definitely Arie Luyendyk parts. You can see him going down through the center as well. But he can get the car turned. Groff cannot.
You can see by those wings how light they are. They're made out of carbon fiber type materials, and they float. They're just light as a feather. There goes Groff into the tires, and of course that really absorbs the energy.
Jack, you have more?
Well, Sam, the thing that I was going to answer Sam Posey's question, the engine is tried and true and proven. It didn't fail them today. It happened to be the mechanical problems from that little altercation riding up over Luyendyk and Johansson. The motor was still running fine.
So still under a full course yellow here, as there's some of the rescue divers just off the edge of the track in the river, just in case they're needed. We hope not. Behind that wall, they have pushed Raul Boesel's car. He is out of the race very early on. Jack Arute's close by.
Well, Raul Boesel, tough luck, but first, what put you out?
My Duracell Lola was running perfect, a lot better than in qualify. I was positioning myself, and it's just an electrical problem.
What about the run out here? What were the track conditions like in the early going? We're looking at that camera right directly across the front of the safety car there.
The track has been pretty good. It's not slippery as that I thought it would be because of the heat. So it'll be good for the tires. It'll be good for the general race.
Tough break.
Tough break, yes.
Tough to see him out early on. We're looking for Mike Groff as well. who climbed out of his car. You saw him running back, and there is his car on its way back, still under full course yellow.
And of course, it's doubly frustrating for Raul Boesel to be out of the race because he is so physically fit. He prepares with such intensity. He loves this sport so much, and there's nothing worse for a driver than not to have a chance even to get tired doing what you love.
What happened to Groff was he had his accident into the tires, and it obviously almost broke something. He got back on the racetrack, was able to run for a little bit, and then the part broke, because when the wrecker was hooking up to it, I could look at the front tires and they weren't anywhere near lined up. So it was all chassis problems instead of engine problems on his car.
Went from an almost break to a real break. As we take a look at the field lined up behind the pace car, we'll look at the entire field as they come down here. 20 laps under yellow here at Detroit in both 1992 and 93. Thus far, we have had 6 laps under yellow here. We're on lap 13. Let's go to Gary Gear.
We're watching Stefan Johansson go back onto the circuit, Paul. They came in for a splash of fuel. They also wanted to take a look at one of the key suspension pieces on the right rear. Apparently no damage from that earlier incident. They want to get him with a heavy load of fuel. Maybe he can gain some of the advantage back when everybody else has to make their first pit stop.
There's an interesting tactic, Bobby.
Well, it's good and it's bad. They just really wanted to check the suspension. Otherwise, it's going to be really bad because he's back behind all of these cars, and it's very difficult to pass. And he won't enjoy this stop until everybody else makes their pit stops.
Well, he has a personal motto, Stefan does. Honesty plus humor equals happiness. I think it keeps him steady. He's going to need steadiness right now because he's got his work cut out for him.
But we know he's not too happy right now about that stop.
It kind of spoils the equation, doesn't it?
Again, with lap 13 now coming to completion, the indication is we should go back to green flag very shortly here. The field is closed up once again. The race started with Nigel Mansell on the pole. He jumped to the lead. In fact, a good jump at the start. And then Al Unser Jr. came around. And right after that, Paul Tracy moved into second place behind Little Al. So now Paul Tracy moves to the inside of Little Al as they all anticipate a green flag as soon as they come down to this bending front straightaway that includes the pits and the start-finish line. There's the bend just before. The pace picks up. Al Unser Jr. brings them back toward the green flag.
Idea, of course, at a restart is to gain as much advantage as you can so the guy behind you can't take a swing at you going into the turn. And that's obviously what Little Al and Paul Tracy were trying to do.
I'll tell you what, it's exhilarating from where we watch to see these restarts. We are sitting literally right on the edge of the track, overlooking the wall, just a few feet down from the start-finish line. When the cars go past here under acceleration, they actually rock the broadcast booth back and forth. Emerson Fittipaldi taking a look at Nigel Mansell now. Gugelmin at the same time looking at Fittipaldi. Looking back through the field now. There's Gugelmin. There's Rahal. The yellow Pennzoil car is Fabi. Then Villeneuve and Robbie Gordon in the Valvoline car. We ride with Robbie Gordon, Jack Arute.
And Paul, Robbie Gordon has his share of problems this afternoon, not in the cockpit of the car as you ride along with him, but on pit road. All these teams need base stations in order to maintain radio communications all the way around this big racetrack in Belle Isle. The base station for Team Walker has conked out. They're working on it, but so far Derek Walker and the team can only speak to Robbie Gordon as he comes down the front stretch and heads into turns 1 and 2. You've got to be brief and got to be specific and definitive.
Well, the good news is that the telemetry coming out of that car to Ford Electronics is terrific. Notice that he is using mostly 5th and 2nd gear. He only really passes through 3rd gear for a little while and then comes back down into 2nd whenever he gets in traffic.
And notice he's turning a little over 13,000 RPM, Paul. And again, you mentioned the 2nd. I was going to mention that. He runs an awful lot of this track in 2nd gear because the straightaways are so short and the turns are somewhat of the same radius.
There's talk of Robbie Gordon going into Winston Cup racing with his longtime mentor, Michael Kranifus, who has formed a team looking for a really hot driver. This is a man very high on his list. That would be a loss, of course, to IndyCar racing.
Michael Kranifus has been prominent here at the track this weekend. Just ahead of Gordon, Villeneuve, and then Fabi. Bobby Rahal now sits in 6th place. We'll come up and take a look at Rahal as he chases Mauricio Gugelmin.
Yes, and I was just going to mention as you watch the telemetry stuff coming out on the engines and stuff, everybody probably wonders, how does the driver know when to shift? They actually get to where they can hear the engine. You notice the rev limiters will cut off on Robbie Gordon's, for example, just above 13,000, but he can hear that engine, so he shifts just before the rev limiter comes in.
Coming back to the lead at the Detroit Grand Prix as we take a look at Al Unser Jr. with Paul Tracy now beginning to give him some pressure.
This is the first time this year that we've really seen a clear battle between Al Unser Jr. and Paul Tracy, two very hot men for the Penske team. Obviously, I said earlier, I believe Tracy is under a lot of pressure not to make a mistake. He's running well back in the championship, 16th. He really needs a success, and he needs to stay on the road.
Pit side once again. Gary Gerould as Adrian Fernandez is in the pits, and it just stalled the engine.
Yeah, Paul, it's a tough one. He came in with a suspected flat tire. They engaged the clutch, and it stopped dead. Now they get it restarted, and Adrian is away for the Gallus team. Remember, last year he finished 7th here, and Rick Gallus had 3 men in the top 7 as Danny Sullivan won. Al Unser Jr., his driver at that time, was 6th. Fernandez started today in the 6th row, but some early disappointment now with an obstacle to try to overcome.
Suspected flat. Was it flat? Gary?
Have not been able to see which one. Now I can see one that may be down, Paul. They're pulling them back over the wall, and a lot of traffic here.
Gary,
certainly find out.
Certainly Adrian Fernandez is one of the most charming young men around this business. He can get a sponsor, keep people interested in the sport. It's around drivers like this that I think the future of the sport will revolve.
Back at the front of the field, Al Unser Jr. being pursued by teammate Paul Tracy.
Adrian Fernandez, I just want to throw a little bit on him. He's very good on the road circuits. Has an awful lot to learn on the ovals. He doesn't seem to be shining there, but get a track like this, he really is fast, has a lot of experience.
First, Al Unser Jr. Second, Paul Tracy. Nigel Mansell, car number 1, sits there in 3rd in the Texaco Newman Haas Lola. Now, he's quite a story lately, and there was a strong indication that there was going to be a news conference concerning Nigel Mansell immediately after this race. And then that went away. Now the next rumor is that there's going to be a news conference held in London on Tuesday. That seems to be a real possibility. Look at him smoke the tires there. He's back fully on style. The strongest rumor, and we report it just as that, seems to be that there is a good chance that Nigel Mansell will drive in Formula One in the races that do not conflict with IndyCar. As we hear more on that, we'll certainly update you.
Well, can I just throw in a little rumor, Paul, that I'm pretty sure is true. Nigel will be going with Formula One next year at least. This goes on past your rumor. And none other than Michael Andretti is going to be driving this car.
Rumor Central in full tilt here.
Well, you know, if you go to the Newman Haas trailer where you can buy model cars and t-shirts and stuff, you can buy 1/43rd scale models of Mario's car and Nigel's car. Mario's car is $22 and Nigel's is only $20. And I asked, well, why is Mario's more expensive? And they said, well, it's his last year. I think they're going to add $2 to Nigel's model too, don't you?
I don't know. I have some doubts. Nigel seems to be, from time to time, quite happy in Indy cars. He may drive some Formula One, but I think he'll keep his focus here. Al Unser Jr., though, is the focus of this race as he continues his lead.
This Ford Fact is brought to you by Ford and your Ford dealer. Have you driven a Ford lately?
In 1994, each of the chassis manufacturers have gone to the sequential gear shifting system. If we look inside Jimmy Vasser's Reynard, we can see that now it's just a simple pull back towards him to come up through the gears, or this way to downshift. If we follow this cable to the back of the car, we come to a completely new transmission housing. Inside is encased the actual mechanism that they copied from a motorcycle transmission. What this means for a driver is that he can quickly come up through the gears, but on the downshifts, some drivers complain, oh, I used to like to skip gears. I used to like to go from 6th down to 2nd gear. But the designers say, boy, am I glad they can't do that anymore. A lot of times they'd over-rev the engine, and that would be the end of the race. They can, however, come up through the gears very quickly, and we know that you win IndyCar races by standing on the gas, not standing on the brakes.
Full course yellow is about to come out in the ITT Automotive Detroit Grand Prix. That car on the left, the MyJack car 19, is Alessandro Zampedri, whom you may remember from the starting situations in Australia, but this time not his problem. Dominic Dobson spun in front of him, and Zampedri just got caught, pulled out to the wall.
Boy, Dominic made a bad boo-boo, left Zampedri with no place to go. Look at him, just collected him up, cars were really getting together. It's lucky he didn't crawl up on top of the other car there, Paul.
Ideal time for the pit stops. Al Unser Jr. on lap 21 takes advantage of the full course yellow that is now out and comes into the pits, as does Gugelmin, Villeneuve, Nigel Mansell. They have all come into the pits just in the few seconds between the start of that accident and the full course yellow coming out.
And remember, on the pit stops, first in, first out. The guys that can come in the quickest go out, and they're ahead in the serial scoring in the lineup. And that's so important on a track that it's so hard to pass on.
Remember, too, there is a speed limit in the pits, so there's every time that there's a mass pouring into the pits, we know there's a chance that someone will exceed that limit.